Alright, so we're going to start another example. And essentially what we're going to do is just using a some basic commands of move and copy. Move and scale. We're going to make somewhat of a column, and after we loft them, I essentially just set up just a series of circles. And after lofting them, again using straight sections, hit OK. We'll end up with something column-like or maybe birthday cake-like. But essentially we're going to set this up in Grasshopper. So I'm going to start off with just making a circle and setting this up with some kind of radius. Give me a slider, and I'm going to do the maximum value. I'll set it at 10 for now. And that'll allow me to change the radius of the circle. Now what I want to do is I want to move this new circle. I just want to move it straight up. So I put in a move component. And for T, I want to put in a vector. So I go to my vector tab, and I put in a unit Z vector. And I'm just going to take my first slider. I'm just going to copy and paste it. Control C, Control V. Plug that in. So now I have the ability to move that circle and adjust the overall size of the circle. And now what I want to do is use a new component, scale. And if I plug in the geometry and some scale factor, I'm just gonna use a brand new slider, just from 0 to 1. And if I look really closely, I can see what it's doing here. It's scaling it, but what it's doing is, as it's scaling, it's also moving it. So it's essentially what it's doing in Rhino. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line. So I'm going to draw a vertical line approximately to where my second circle is. So essentially what it's doing is, as it's scaling it, it's taking that overall distance between the two circles and making that a distance between 0 and 1. So at 0, not only is it scaling the circle, but it's also putting the 0 down here. And at 1, it's again scaling the circle, but assuming that 1 distance is all the way up top. And say, for example, if I were to have it at 0.5, what it's doing is putting it right in the center, and again, it's also scaling it by half, which is not exactly what I want. I don't want it to move vertically as it's scaling. I just want it to stay in the exact same, along the same plane. So what I can do is I can use this center point, and I can use the center point of this circle. So what I can do is I can plug this into my center point, and now this stays in place. Let me delete this line. So now when I scale it, it's scaling in the exact same location. So I'm going to scale it some size smaller, and what I want to do now is I want to move it again. And instead of typing in move and another Z value and another slider, I'm just going to copy and paste these three. Hold down Shift to select them all, copy paste, and plug this new geometry in there. So now I have that new one, and I'm going to scale this again, so I don't want to have to redo all this again. So again, just copy paste, plug in the new geometry and the center for that new geometry. So now essentially what I'm doing is just repeating the same commands over and over. And I can still adjust the original circle, the original heights. So the nice thing about this is as I'm moving the original heights, what it's doing is it's the original move is based off of the ground, like the ground plane. The second move is based off of my first move. So as I move this, so I move my first one a certain distance, the angle or the distance between my second and third ones remains the same until I move the distance between my second and third one with the slider. Right, but at this point I have enough circles where I can start to loft them together. So I'm going to double click and do loft. And the curve that I want to loft, I'm going to start off with my original circle. I'm going to move to the first circle that I moved. Again, hold down Shift, the scaled version. The next one that I moved. And then the next one that I scaled. And I'm starting to end up with something like this. And that's because I had my default loft option is to make everything smooth. So under my options, I'm going to right click, go to loft options, and instead of normal, I want to do straight. Commit changes, and now I have that. Alright, so let's do that. Let's copy and paste that one more time. So after scale, I'm going to do move, copy and paste those. And I'm going to scale this second one. Copy and paste. Again, plug that in. So now I have this. So one thing you'll notice is when you have your scale between 0 and 1, 0 obviously it goes down to a single point. So that's why when you're at 0, it goes red. Because you're at a single point, which you can't really do. And when you go to 1, it goes to the maximum size of the previous circle. But if you adjust this to 2, it allows the scale to go larger. So at 2, it's double the size of the existing circle. And now what I can do is I can start to include, again holding down Shift, I can start to include those as part of my column. Alright, so as of now what I want to do is I'm going to add more to this loft option. And as I can see in my loft option, there's a lot of curves starting to come in here. I want to have a little bit more control as to the way the curves are set up and how everything's being inputted. So I'm going to start this over again from the beginning. The only difference is I'm going to use a command called merge. So merge, I can see that I have two inputs. So I'm going to start off with my original circle and put that into D1. And then what I want to do is that my first move component, I want to put that into D2. And as soon as I plug one into D2, I see D3 pop up. So I'm going to go to my first scale, plug that in, and now D4 pops up. And I'm going to go to my next move and my next scale. So it's essentially starting to manage my inputs a little bit better. It's doing the same thing I'm doing here. So at this point, I want to go to my original loft, disconnect, right click on C, disconnect, disconnect all, And I'm going to plug this in instead. So it's doing the same thing, except now I have better management of my overall input. Again, I'll do the same thing. Just work my way down the line. And going to that last scale. Also, the nice thing about this merge, using this, say for example, if you accidentally put one of these in the wrong location, or you accidentally you change your definition where you need to put a space between D5 and D6, instead of rearranging everything, instead of replugging everything in, if you zoom in just a little bit, in between every number you'll see a plus sign. So for example, if I needed one between D5 and D6, I just click the plus sign, it adds a new one, and I just plug it in. So I don't have to rearrange everything. If I accidentally skipped one and I don't need it, on D6 for example, I just delete it, and it's back to normal. So it is a pretty nice component to have. It organizes everything a little bit better. So the last thing I'm going to try, instead of having my column come up and like bend at 90 degrees, I wanted to flare out or flare back in. So what I need to do is I first need to set up the move command, just like I had before. So now I move that overall circle, and I'm going to scale it. So what I want to do at this point is I want to skip this move component. What I want to do is I want to immediately jump to the scale. So essentially I'm going from one scale that's going into 7 to another scale that's going into 8. And what that allows is, because I skipped the move component, I'm still able to adjust it by moving it up or down. I'm just not lofting directly to it. What I'm lofting to is the scaled version. So now it's allowing me to have one that is at an angle. All right. And then again, just to get more practice, continue doing this until you have several iterations of the move and scale working its way up the column. The last thing we're going to do just to finish this off is just say, for example, you have a line, and along that line you want to set up a series of these columns. So something similar to what we did at the beginning. I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to start at put my grid snap on, start at 0, 0, and just draw a line that goes out some distance. I want to use that, input this line into Grasshopper now. So now I need to go to my primitives and use one of these components, right? Because these are the components that that bring in your geometry from Rhino into Grasshopper. So a line is essentially a curve. So I'm going to bring in the curve component, set one curve, and what I want to do now is I want to divide this curve. So I do double click, do divide curve. I divide this curve by a set amount of points, and I'm going to double click again, 10. If you remember, if you type in 10, it's the shortcut for a slider, and it gives me a slider between 0 and 10 that I can adjust. And now what I want to do is I want to use the points to tell it which points, which planes to use here. So if I plug this in, I'm going to get some very strange results. So essentially what's happening is it's misreading the way I want this to work. What it's thinking is, to stretch out my column, instead of going straight up, it's going to stretch it out from this point all the way to the end, and then back again, and then all the way to the end, and then back again, and then all the way to the end, and then back. Essentially, what I wanted to do is put a column at every point. Right. So if I open up this yellow panel, you can, if you double click inside, you can start to write something. Like, it's a good way to take notes. But another thing this yellow panel can do is it can tell you what information is inside this component. And in this case, it's telling me exactly what is being shown. So it's giving me this list, and the list is essentially that starting point, and it's going in order, just one big list. And if I go to on the circle, if I right click on P and I go to graph, what graph does is it breaks up that list into individual components, or into individual parts. So as soon as I do that, my panel looks different, and so do my lines. My lines are now dashed. So what it's telling me is, instead of it being one big object, it's now separated into separate objects. And I can now see, like, I have a circle, it's a 0, and then a space, a circle, 0, and a space. So it's telling me I have individual parts. So now I have that line, which now I can control with a series of circles. Right? I could even substitute that line with a curve. Again, I'll start at 0, 0. And instead of a line, I'm just going to set one curve. And now it's dividing that curve, and it's putting these columns along that curve, and I can still adjust everything else as I have been able to do before, being able to control all these columns. And I'll adjust the last part. So hopefully this will give you a little bit more practice in using Grasshopper, and next week we'll continue with maybe with the possibility of trying to start to introduce paneling tools through Grasshopper.